Hey, good morning, everybody. I am going live this morning with Dale Clevenger, and Dale is my GOAT. He's the greatest of all time, and just wanted to bring him to an audience on Instagram. And I wanted to have this conversation basically to facilitate the inspiration that he's given to me. Aha, here's Dale. We're waiting for Dale. I wanted to facilitate a conversation with Dale. Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Dale. How are you?
Fine.
Hey, you are live on Instagram.
Right now.
10:58.
Okay.
So we have an hour to talk together, and basically what I wanted to do is facilitate a conversation with you about your career and your inspirations. What stands out to me is just the fact that you've had such a long career and you've worked with everybody from Leonard Bernstein, George Solti, Carlos Kleiber.
It's easier to say who I've not worked for.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and your first musical encounters? Like, what were your first musical experiences?
I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And what would be, for a long time, it was podunk, which means it's just a small town, not so important. Now it's getting more important because they have a Volkswagen plant there, and it's pretty big. My family were a church-going family, so we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, like clockwork.
Wow.
And at church, of course, we sang. We did not have instrumental music because it was a type of church that did not have it. So we sang, and in the process, I don't know if I learned music, but I learned the songs, and I sang, and so forth. And then when I was about 7, living two houses away from us was a piano teacher.
Wow.
And somehow I got connected with her, and we had a piano. Everybody in my family had studied piano at some time in their past. Everybody. Wow. Not everybody played that well, but, So I started studying with Mrs. Dickerson. I remember her name.
Remember her name.
Yeah. And I was 7 years old, and I studied from 7 until 12 with her, and then I started again when I went to college. So I studied piano almost 10 years total.
Wow.
But during that time, my father was very interested in culture, in symphony concerts, and in opera. And he was a businessman who was very interested in things that are going on around Chattanooga. And he became president of the Chattanooga Opera Association. And in that process with him, he took me to symphony concerts and operas. And that was the beginning of my becoming infatuated with the symphony orchestra, just looking at it. And in Chattanooga, Tennessee, we had 3 operas per year and about 6 or 8 symphony concerts. So I can't remember exactly how many I went to, but he took me to a lot of them. And looking back on it, I found myself just infatuated with the orchestra itself.
Wow.
The people there who were actually making the music. And then the music was wonderful. I remember going to the opera of Hansel and Gretel, and they had made one of the houses out of cinnamon cookies, and after the opera was over, everybody went up and broke off a piece of the house and so on. And while I'm looking at the orchestra, my attention went to the horns. Why I cannot tell you For some people, it goes to the cellos. For some people, it goes to a bassoon. But in this case, it was the horns. And obviously what happened, the more I looked at the horns, the more I paid attention to what they were doing, the more I was infatuated by the whole situation, the orchestra. And I remember the concerts were at the high school where I went to high school. And when the opera played the opera performances, they sat in a pit, which was about 4 feet lower than the stage. So you could sit on the front row and see the stage very well. But I asked my daddy, I said, can I go down and sit by the orchestra? And he said, sure. And I sat down right by the horns, and I just looked at them. And I did it enough times that they got to know me. And by this time, I was in the 5th grade, and we had an opportunity to get band instruments. And naturally, I wanted a horn. My father could not buy it because he couldn't afford it at the time. And so he said, would you be willing to play a trumpet? And I said, oh, okay. So he got me a trumpet. And I remember how much it cost, $125. Wow.
Yeah.
And I played the 5th and 6th. The schools at that time were 1 through 6, 7, 8, and 9, junior high, 10, 11, and 12. They've changed that now, but at that time. And when I went to junior high, I played in the grade school in the 5th and the 6th grade, the orchestra, band. When I went to junior high, we moved from that area closer to town. In fact, we moved across the street from the junior high school.
Wow.
And by then I was playing the trumpet, but I was in the 7th grade. And I saw in a closet a horn. It wasn't being used. And I said to the band director and the lady orchestra director, I said, can I try that horn? And they didn't have any horn players, so they said, sure. So I put away the trumpet. I got a school horn, a single F silver horn. And
just like you have in your studio, right?
It's very similar to that. And actually, curiously, somebody's saying they don't get Instagram. Sorry about that. I got a hold of that horn, but it was stolen from me. So otherwise I would have had, I don't know what it was. It was a silver horn. The one I have now is quite a bit better than that one.
Can we just do a couple hellos to people in the audience real quick?
Absolutely.
First of all, I'd love to just interrupt you and just say hi to Jesse, your son, who's watching. Emily and Jesse are watching from Dallas. Hopefully from Dallas, maybe from Houston, not quite sure. I know we've got Hans Klepsch, who's third horn in the Cleveland Orchestra. We've got Eric Reed from New York. Hello, gentlemen. So nice to see you. Hey, Eric. We've got Melody from Taiwan. We've got Mark Jansen from Dallas, Texas. Hey, Mark. Mark was a student of yours at Roosevelt. Yeah. And we've got Amber Dean, Dave and Mr. Clevenger, two of my favorite horn players. Thanks, Amber. And we have Esteban, the new principal trumpet in the Chicago Symphony.
Yeah. Hi, Esteban.
Esteban is one of my dear friends. We're so lucky to have him here in Chicago.
Fantastic musician who plays the trumpet.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's what people say about you, Dale. They say that you're a fantastic musician who plays the horn. That's one of the things that Jay commented. He said, Dale's one of the finest musicians on any instrument that I know of. He just happens to play the horn. And that's one of the things I would love to get into. What inspired you musically? Like how did you take this instant love of the horn and transfer your musical?
If I can continue my story.
Yeah, sure.
Your question will be answered. So I started horn in December of my 7th grade. And in a year's time, I'd already played trumpet 2 years, so I knew something about brass playing. The band director who came to the junior high was also the band director at the high school. And he asked me in the 8th grade, would you like to go on a band trip? We're going to a contest in Middle Tennessee. Would you like to go? I didn't know why he asked me, but I said yes. So I was the assistant second horn player, and I as a junior high went with the band. Well, I was infatuated with the high school band and how well they played and so forth. And the lady who was playing first horn, her name was Hilda Brooks. She sort of took me under her wing as a, you know, and when I finally got to high school, I was in the 10th grade and she was the 12th grade. And we would start playing duets. Well, when I started the horn, by the time I was 14, I was already buying records. The first recording that I bought was Mahler First Symphony, Bruno Walter, New York Philharmonic with an orchestra. And the first solo recording that I bought was, and these were cheap records, you know, you just go in the store and they're on sale, was Valery Polak playing the Glier Horn Concerto. And also all of Dennis Brain's recordings. Well, I was listening to these like a fiend. Wow. Just over and over and over. And the more I listened, the more I liked, the more infatuated I came with the horn. And then when I got into 10th grade and Hilda took me under her wing, we started playing duets together. Well, the only book that was available was the Potag book. The only one. And we played every duet that was in that book over and over and over. Well, I learned, by the time I was the end of the 10th grade, I learned all the Beethoven symphonies, the keys, you know, the horn solos and everything. Just play it. Then I took an audition the beginning of my junior year to play in the Chattanooga Symphony, 4th horn. Well, the lady who played 3rd horn was a former student of Forrest Stanley. And she told me about this teacher that she had. And would you like to go study with him? And I said, sure. And so I played 4th horn in the Chattanooga Symphony for 2 years. So already I've got 12 or 15 concerts and 1 opera be under my belt. They had to have 3 horns in this opera because it was Fidelio. And I got to play 3rd horn in Fidelio. And guess who the tenor was? A very young Jan Vickers. Wow. Who became the greatest tenor in the world. We didn't know that, but everybody, as soon as he started singing, everybody in the pit looked up at him and said, my goodness, who is that? Young Canadian tenor. So by the time I finished high school, I had played 2 years, 4th horn, probably 25 concerts. And plus the high school I went to had the best music department in all of the South. Wow. We had a great chorus, an excellent orchestra, an excellent concert band, and the best marching band in 8 states. Mm. Our band director was very, very famous. He wrote 12 books on marching and so forth. And yes, I marched for 3 years. Wow.
And that's crazy to think of you in marching band.
Yeah. And in fact,
we all did it.
We also had ROTC, and I became the director of the band. What do you call it? The
drum major.
The drum major.
Wow.
So I didn't have to play. So all of this music is being saturated in me. I still attend concerts. An orchestra come into Chattanooga. I go and listen, blah, blah, blah. At the end of my junior year, I took a bus 24 hours to Chautauqua, New York, studied with Forrest Stanley for 8 weeks. And he asked me if I'd like to study with him permanently. And I said, absolutely. So I never applied to any other school. I went to what was Carnegie Institute of Technology. Now it's Carnegie Mellon, where Bill Cavallaro teaches.
Yes.
Wonderful guy, wonderful musician, wonderful player, and fine teacher. And one of my students here is going to study with him next year.
No kidding.
So by the time I finished high school, I had all this experience playing in the orchestra in high school and the Chattanooga Symphony. I played that opera and so forth. I went into, and I had already built a record collection that was just terrific. And I listened to it all the time. In this house that we bought near the junior high, it was a very long house, and my room was over the garage, so I didn't disturb anybody when I was listening late at night. And I got to college. I went to Carnegie Mellon and started playing in the orchestra and the wind ensemble and the band. And at the end of my freshman year, I was 18. I auditioned and I went down and played in the Wheeling Symphony, but first horn. And that was like, the Wheeling Symphony was, a small town, 90 minutes south of Pittsburgh. But at the final rehearsal, about a fourth of the Pittsburgh Symphony would come down and play the rehearsal and the concert. So the Pittsburgh Symphony started hearing me play. The next 3 years, the rest of college, I played every concert with the Wheeling Orchestra. My junior and senior year in college, I started playing extra with the Pittsburgh Symphony. Well, all of this is just feeding my desire to play. And I knew by the time I was 15 or 16 that I wanted to play horn in a major orchestra.
Wow, by 15 or 16.
If that was possible.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted it to be solo horn.
Yeah.
Because I knew what it was like to play fourth horn. I didn't want to play fourth horn. I wanted to play solo.
Yeah.
They got all the solos. So I get this experience when I'm in the university, and also about 8 to 10 concerts a year with the Wheeling Symphony. That means 25 to 30 concerts before I even got out of college. I'm playing solo horn, and many of the Pittsburgh Symphony would come down and play, including Forrest Stanley's wife. And an interesting thing, the first few weeks that I played, a young fourth horn player came from another school, and his name was, shoot. Sorry, everybody, I forget.
Dale, could I interrupt you really quick? Would you have a music stand you might be able to put the phone on?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're losing half of your face if you wouldn't mind, and then while we've stopped, I really want to just say a quick hello to Dan Gingrich. Dan is watching right now, and I'm blown away to have the two of you here right now. It's just really, Chicago Symphony for me was the greatest orchestra, that I would ever get to listen to. And then just, maybe turn it down just a tiny, or raise it up, and then so it's square level with your head. So like bring the music stand up and then straighten it. Okay. So it's not like you're looking there, and then lower the desk just a little bit lower. Point it a little lower.
You tell me when.
Lower. Perfect. Wonderful.
Okay.
Little lower if you could.
Got it.
Thank you, Dale. Perfect. Great. And so now I think this is a really great transition. You have been able to work with some of the most influential teachers. You worked with Forrest Stanley. You were also mentored by Joseph Singer, who wrote the Singer book.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about what you learned from working with those two legendary teachers and pedagogues.
Well, Forrest Stanley, when I studied with him at Chautauqua and decided to go to Carnegie Tech, I invested 4 years of my life studying with him and him only.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to start thinking in my junior year, what am I going to do when I graduate? All of my students have to do the same. Everybody does when they graduate. And I said, Mr. Stanley, if I went to New York to study and there was somebody to study with, who would you recommend? Instantaneously, he said, Joe Singer.
Wow.
He's one of the solo horns in New York Philharmonic. In fact, he was there 3 years before Chambers came. Wow. And after Chambers stopped playing. I said, and curiously enough, both of them studied with the same teacher.
Mm-hmm.
a guy named Franzel. So they had very similar approaches to the horn.
Chambers and Singer, correct?
No,
Stanley and Singer.
Stanley.
Okay.
Stanley was a little bit more on the athletic side, the technical side of playing. Singer was a little bit more on the artistic side, the musical side of playing, just as a balance. And interestingly enough, Joe Singer played viola before he ever played horn.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
In the Detroit Symphony.
What?
So he was already a musician, and he liked the horn. And at 21, he picked up the horn and started playing it.
Wow.
He didn't start when he was 12.
The principal horn of the New York Philharmonic picked up the horn.
Right.
At 21. Wow.
He played then. I don't know if he actually played horn in the Detroit Orchestra, but he probably did. And he later auditioned and became the third horn in Boston.
Wow.
And played there 10 years.
Wow.
And I mean, this was in the 30s or early 40s.
Mm.
Then he auditioned in the 40s. And Joe Singer had absolute pitch, had a wonderful ear.
Wow.
And is very, very smart man, you know. So I went and studied with Joe Singer. He introduced me to people and helped me get started when I moved to New York. And he came to the New York Philharmonic about 1951 or 2, something like that, as 3 years before Chambers came. And when he came, they worked out a deal where both of them would be principal. Equal salary, equal title, equal nearly everything. So with Forrest Stanley and Joe Singer, I had a basic foundation in the horn, the technique of the horn, and as much music as I could. I realized that it's everywhere I go, they're more interested in how you play musically than they are the technique of the horn.
Yes.
Technique.
I just want to repeat that for everyone listening. People are more interested in how you play musically than how you play technically.
Right.
And that's one of your big philosophies is what musical expression dictates technique. That's one of your famous quotes, isn't it?
Exactly. The artistic dictates the technical.
Yes.
Now, if any horn player who plays them in a major orchestra has got terrific technique. They all do. But the big thing is, when you play a solo, the audience is not interested in what fingers or valves or how you hold your hand. They only want to know how you sound and how beautifully you phrase. So, I mean, and I realize that there are many, many people, many horn players and many musicians who are ultra infatuated with fabulous technique. So am I. I admit it. I mean, and there are horn players who got more technique than I ever had and can do things that I could never do. But when the lights are low and the conductor points that baton at you and you got to play Oberon.
Wow.
Very quietly. You're not thinking about technique. You're thinking about playing beautifully. And 60-70% of what horns do anyway in an orchestra is chord structure, not technical stuff. So by the time I got to New York, I started freelancing and working, and one of the first contractors who called me was Harvey Phillips.
Wow.
One of my predecessor colleagues here. And Harvey was a phenomenal tuba player, a wonderful person, and he was a contractor in New York long before he came here to teach. And the first thing that he called me for was Mahler Second Symphony. And so I arrived at the rehearsal, and I said, Harvey, what do you want me to play? I expected to be one of the horns off stage. He says, we'd like you to play second horn. I said, oh, Okay. And I was playing with a guy named Ralph Furlick, and I became friends with all the the best horn players in New York. John Barrows had left New York, and that left Jim Buffington and Ray Alonji and all these guys of my generation. And I became friends with them. But being friends is one thing, but how you play when you play with them is quite another.
Mm.
And I played in several orchestras in New York. They don't do those anymore because so many outside orchestras come into New York to play that the orchestras that were formed from musicians who were freelancing in New York, there are not many of those anymore.
Mm.
So I got to play in lots of orchestras, and you just gradually build a reputation. I'll tell the story because I think it's necessary. I auditioned for Radio City Music Hall, and my audition was the show with Bolero in it. And I had to play Bolero probably 50 times because the girls were dancing to the music of Bolero. But my audition period was 1 month. And I did something that I should not have done, and I learned a very valuable lesson. I did what everybody else in the orchestra did, and that was make fun of the conductor.
Oh.
And they fired me after 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
It's the best thing that ever happened to me because I learned a valuable lesson. Keep your mouth shut and just play.
Wow.
And I got out of a very, very difficult job, very hard job.
Yes. 50 boleros in a month. Can you imagine?
4 shows a day, 2 hours between each show. And what do you do for 2 hours in New York between shows? It's a bloodbath. And then I got introduced to some contractors who played Broadway shows. I was called to play a Broadway show. Oliver was the first Broadway show that I played. I opened it in New York.
Oh my gosh. You know, that's one of my favorite musicals.
Yeah. Well, we played it in New York. It ran for 9 years. I played 9 months of it.
Hey, Dale, just take the music stand and pull it closer to you. Just a little bit closer so we can hear you a little bit better. Just pull more closer.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
And, yeah, thank you. Sorry.
No
Just
problem.
Technical stuff.
So anyway, my career in New York was blossoming. I mean, there were times that I would go for a month or 2 months and the telephone never rang. You know, but that was not too often. And as I got called to do overtime for one of my friends on a jingle, on a commercial. I got called to do the overtime because he had to go to do another session. And so I walked in and I sat down and I played for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and that was all. But the fact that you can do it, they remember that.
Wow.
And other players on the jingle, they see you this, and my first recording date was April the 1st, 1963. Big band. I still have the recording for it.
Yeah, and I heard that at your house. It was so much fun.
There were a whole bunch of contractors playing, you know, and they went to the other guys in the horn section and said, "Who's the new guy?"
Wow. So
the word starts spreading, and you know, now all of this time, every time there's an opportunity to take an audition, I took it. I played maybe 9 or 10 auditions that I did not make. And I never expected to get it or not to get it. I just played the best I could. When I was 22, just after moving to New York, I played for the Berlin Philharmonic. The entire Berlin Philharmonic was in the orchestra, in the Carnegie Hall, and Von Karajan was there. It's the only time I ever played for Von Karajan.
Wow.
And I played for 25 minutes. I was 22 years old. And the audition went pretty well. But they decided I didn't have the tone for the orchestra. Or I could have had a career, maybe could have had it and, you know, gone to Europe and done that. But it didn't work out. And it was just an audition experience.
Yes.
And if you play enough of them, you get used to being under very high pressure and playing as good as you can. You must come to an audition ultra prepared. If you're not prepared, you're not hireable. Mm. So finally, I took an audition in '65 for Chicago. On my own, I went out. I knew that there was an opening. And this is, I had played the year before in the Kansas City Philharmonic. I realized I did not want to play on that level of orchestra. So I went back to New York, continued freelancing, playing auditions, and I did not get engaged in Chicago in May of 1965. Mm-hmm. Then I was recommended by 2 or 3 other conductors when they had that audition again in January of '66. And then the stuff started to happen. I mean, I was very busy in New York, playing all I could make. I made a very good salary, blah, blah, blah. I could have stayed there and freelanced, so forth. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to play solo horn. Why? I don't know why. I liked what the solo horns did. By now I have a records collection that's 3 feet long. And I had heard every horn player in the world play and realized that there were many different styles and sounds of horns. And I didn't form any opinions about, I just wanted to play what I could do to do the best. So it was recommended that I go to Chicago by Alfred Wallenstein and Stokowski. He wrote me a letter of introduction. And I went and I played.
I need to back up really quick. Could you talk a little bit about your time with Symphony of the Air?
Yeah.
And I would love, and how you met Stokowski, because I think that's really important to share with the audience, and who Stokowski was.
There are two different orchestras we're talking about. The Symphony of the Air was the name of the end of what was the NBC Symphony. Mm-hmm. And I played in its last year that it functioned, and under Alfred Wallenstein, we played everything that Brahms wrote for an orchestra that season. But that's the orchestra was getting sued. They couldn't pay their bills, so they couldn't use the name Symphony of the Air. Hmm. Now, another symphony that I played in, I auditioned. I went to Stokowski's home on 5th Avenue and 70th something, and I played an audition for him, and I got in his orchestra. I could write a chapter about that audition itself, but we don't have time to talk about it on this thing. But I played 3 years with Stokowski, and when I told him, Maestro, I'm going to Chicago to audition for solo horn, he says, I hope you don't make it. He said, I'm joking, of course. He said, would you like a letter of recommendation? I said, of course. And he sent one.
Wow.
And so when I went the second time, after playing 3 years with Stokowski and several other orchestras, the American Symphony Orchestra, the blah, 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 and what was the Symphony of the Air. Then in January of '66, I went and auditioned. Playing with Stokowski was amazing, because I had studied in my classes in Carnegie Mellon 2 major conductors. One of my teachers kept playing their recordings, either Stokowski or Toscanini. Toscanini was an objective composer. Stokowski was a subjective composer. I mean, conductor.
Conductor, yeah.
And objective means as close as possible to the score and what he thinks the composer wanted. Stokowski would do things that he wanted to do, irregardless of what the composer said.
Wow.
And he made no excuse for it. But he was interested in sound, in tone, in beautiful phrasing, and so forth. And the results that each of them got was really quite different. Wow. But Stokowski was, 35 years or whatever with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and another 10 with the Houston Symphony. And then he came to New York, and he was probably in his high 80s when he came there.
Wow.
So, but he liked me, and fortunately, and I had a wonderful time playing in his orchestra.
So you went to Chicago and you did the audition?
I went to Chicago the second time in January of '66.
Wow.
And the week that I went like this. I was always advised, wake up in the town that you're going to audition in. Don't drive or fly there the same day. Wake up there, because you want a good night's sleep, you want a good breakfast, and so on. And I had to anyway, because my audition was at 9:30 in the morning on Monday morning, the second week of January. I arrived at Orchestra Hall. I slept as well as I could, and I had a nice breakfast. I arrived there at 9 o'clock or 8:45. I warmed up. I was ready to go. And then at 9:30, they helped the orchestra off stage. They brought me on stage, and I played in Orchestra Hall on stage. And in the audience was the conductor, the acting first horn, Frank Brauch, the manager, and the personnel manager, plus a newly elected audition committee, which did not exist in May when I played 9 months before that, 8 months. But they had a new contract, and this was the first year of a 5-year contract, and they needed the solo horn. So I played for 25 minutes. They discussed how I played, and they said, Mr. Clevenger, can you stay here and play the rehearsal with the orchestra this morning at 10 o'clock? And I said, yes, I suppose so. I have a plane at 1 o'clock or something like that. Go back to New York, but I could change that. I said, what are they playing? What are they rehearsing? Tchaikovsky Fifth. I said, oh, yes. And Andre Previn was the guest conductor.
Wow.
So Andre was on the podium. Martineau and the committee were all out in the audience. And I sat there and played through the first movement and all of the second movement of Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony. And it went well. Obviously, or I wouldn't have had the job. So they did not make up their minds at that moment. I flew back to New York. Did not expect anything, didn't know what to expect. So you don't expect anything. Yes, not a yes or a no. I started doing my work. The next morning, that week I had 2 concerts with Stokowski at the end of the week. I had rehearsals in the morning. I also had a rehearsal and a concert scheduled with Wallenstein and what would have been called the Symphony of the Air, all in the same week. And I went back, and on Wednesday morning, before I left the house, they called me and said, Mr. Clevenger, we would like for you to be the new solo horn of Chicago. I fell down on the floor, literally, and cried. Because that was the moment that the beginning of what I had been trying to do since I was 14. 11 years ago, 11 years before that. I screamed, and I went to the rehearsal with Stokowski, and nobody knew then, but within a couple of hours, it was all over the city and all over the country, and by telephone, not by the little phones that we carry today. On Friday morning, that was Wednesday. On Friday morning, Joe Singer called me and says, Dale, he knew that I had made it because I called him. He says, can you come and play extra with us? I said, what's the matter? He said, so-and-so is sick. I'm going to play assistant with Jimmy Chambers, and you can come in and sit in and play fifth. I said, what's the piece? Heldenleben. I said, oh, okay. So on Friday morning, I sight read Heldenleben with the New York Philharmonic in a concert. And I had to leave because that was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had a rehearsal at 4. And I called him and told him I would be a little bit late because I was playing with the New York Philharmonic. And they knew that. And so I had to rush out during the applause. One of the trumpet players yelled at me as I was walking past me, and he says, "Bravo, whoever you are." And I went back that was at Lincoln Center. I went back to Carnegie Hall. And as I walked in the door to go to my seat for the rehearsal with, we'll call it the Symphony of the Air, Alfred Wallenstein, who had recommended me to go to Chicago that second time, he said to the orchestra, he stopped the rehearsal, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like for you to meet the new solo horn of Chicago." You know, and I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to think. I was, what do you do? And everybody who's been in this situation, you've been there, you don't know what to think. It's like the beginning of what you've dreamed of all your life. You're finally going to get to do it. And on that concert with the Symphony of the Air, I was playing third horn, and and Maury Seacon was playing first horn, and we played both Brahms piano concertos, where all the solos are in the third horn. And the piano soloist was Arthur Rubinstein.
Wow.
And so it is still unbelievable to me that week. And when I got to the New York Philharmonic and played, Steinberg saw me, and he knew me from Pittsburgh playing, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Somebody's sick and I'm going to play for them." He says, "Do you know the piece?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Have you ever played it?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh my God." And Joe Singer said to him, he says, "Maestro, you're talking to the new solo horn of Chicago." So I read the piece. I probably didn't play it perfectly. Nothing is perfect anyway. And that was the beginning week. Chicago wanted to know on Wednesday, "How soon can you get here?" And I said, "I have obligations for another 2 weeks. I can come there and be ready for a rehearsal on February 6th, 1966. And my first rehearsal, I walked into the orchestra and I sight read the Frank Martin Concerto for 7 winds, timpani, percussion. And I heard sounds around me like I had never heard in my life. I could not believe. Remember that when I was in high school, I didn't tell you this, but the lunchroom was next to the band room. We would get our lunch, take it into the band room, eat our lunch, and the band director would play recordings. Guess what orchestra? Chicago Symphony. So that's 10 years ago. Now I'm sitting in and playing solo horn with the Chicago Symphony that I had heard 10 years ago, and realizing a dream which was just incredible. And I never walked on the stage out of fear. Never. Always with anticipation, with anxiety, positive anxiety. I'm here. I'm doing something which I can't believe. And I still can't believe it. I can't believe I did it. And you got to feel the same way.
I do. Yeah. I'm really grateful.
You know, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
The orchestra has changed personalities. It changed a little bit while I was there, and it's going to change when you were there. But it's the Chicago Symphony.
Yes.
I mean, every big orchestra has this metamorphosis.
Could you talk a little bit about Bud, about Jake, Jay,
Yeah.
the legendary Chicago brass?
Well, for me, they were legends by ear. I had heard them on recording.
Yes.
And and the recordings were unbelievable. I mean, I listened to everything that I could possibly that our band director put on the recording, and I bought Chicago Symphony recordings. I
did too. Yeah.
I bought recordings from every orchestra. So I heard Cleveland Orchestra, I heard Philly, I heard New York Philharmonic, Berlin Philharmonic. Chicago wasn't the only one. So I was mentally comparing orchestras and so forth. I never heard anything that I liked better than Chicago. And now I'm sitting in front of this giant, this lion, and I can't imagine. I can't believe it. And I imitated him. I listened to the tuba, the bottom of the orchestra, and Kleinhammer and Crisafulli and all of the brass section. And it was just constant inspiration. It never stopped. Never stopped. And gradually I proved myself. You know, I got a headline. The first concert. Bold, burnished horn. The last sentence of that critique, he said, never mind a couple of missed notes. Wow. They have to mention it.
Yeah.
And so I realized right away, okay, they're going to give you glory, but they're also going to point out your faults.
Yeah.
Get used to it. Live with it. From then on, I didn't pay much attention to critics because most critics are like eunuchs in a harem.
No, Dale, let's skip that.
They can make out of it. That's not my comment. That's Alan Sibble's.
Okay, all right. So we'll say that's for Alan Civil.
They can do with that what they want. I can say that now.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yes.
So every day for me was a red letter day. Every rehearsal, every concert, tour after tour. I got to know these men privately. Herseth was a certain persona when he was sitting there playing. Wow. He was another persona when he had been at the bar in the hotel and had a couple of belts of whiskey. He was just a fantastically interesting man.
Wow.
And smart, and as it turns out, I understand John Hagstrom is writing either a book or an article on him.
I think a biography maybe, and he's compiling his journals, which
right.
Bud's son actually gave to John.
In that journal, I was told that Bud, from before the time that he got in the Chicago Symphony, he planned everything, everything that he played, the way that he played, what he wanted to accomplish, in detail. And of course, you hear that, and you're not aware of that when you listen to that, but you're just aware of this virtual perfection. I mean, I actually heard him miss a couple of notes in a season.
Wow.
You know, and I heard him mumble under his breath many, many things, some of which I can repeat on the air, some not. But, he was a human being like all the rest of us, but he was he, like you, like me, and many other people, he was given a gift from the Almighty. Why? I don't know. Why me? I don't know. To be able to do something that's beyond imagination and that gives the whole world a pleasure, a joy that is undescribable. And heaven knows that right now, during this time, the world needs some joy because, with this virus that's going on, wow, when will we ever get out of it? But that's the beginning of my time with Chicago Symphony. And over the course of the year, I realized that Chicago Symphony, more than any other orchestra, was getting the best of the best of the best conductors to conduct them. And most other major orchestras never played with Schulte. They don't know what it's like to play with Schulte. They never played with Barenboim, except when he was playing the piano, but they never played with him conducting. They never played with Abbado only Los Angeles played with Giulini because he became the music director there.
Wow.
And those four by itself. And then, as you mentioned, Carlos Kleiber. Chicago's the only orchestra he ever conducted in America.
Yes.
And many, 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 many other fantastic conductors. We had many mediocre conductors. And they didn't come back, some of them, but, you know, not all conductors can be great. Some are better musically than they are conductorially.
Dale, do you have a favorite conductor that you worked with, like that you could talk about?
If you force my hand, I have to say probably the greatest musician that I can remember overall in every way is Daniel Barenboim.
I was listening to his Bach Goldberg variations this morning, and
it's just he's like a reincarnation of Mozart.
Yeah.
And Bach, and I played with him as a conductor. I also played lots of chamber music with him. I sat on the stage and played chamber music in the form of when he's playing a Mozart concerto or Beethoven concerto.
Wow, what was that like?
It's unbelievable. I missed entrances because I'm watching what he's doing and listening to what he's doing. It's not like anybody else. Somehow it rises above the fray.
Could you talk about the master class he gave in Chicago that you recommend for all your students to watch with the young pianists?
Oh, boy.
It's an insight into his mind and a window into his thoughts.
Let me prelude that with, I had insights into his mind as a conductor many, many years, because he started conducting. He's 2 years younger than I am. And he came when he was 28, and he was a guest conductor until he became music director. And that's a lot of years. That's over 35 years or more that I actually played as a musician, and he's conducting. Also, these master classes, he did everything. Whatever, as a conducting teacher, he was fantastic. Amazing. He didn't try to change anybody. He just got them thinking in a different way. And I was at the master class where he was coaching. I can't remember the name of the pianist. They later on became very famous themselves.
There was Lang Lang and Jonathan Biss,
right?
Both pianists, yeah.
Yeah, Biss and Lang Lang, right? Lang Lang was very smart. He went and studied with Barenboim privately every month, and he, you know, it changed his musicianship.
Wow,
a lot. Lang Lang was spectacular as a pianist, and you know, very good music. But his music started to change as he worked more and more with Daniel. And most conductors don't give themselves the way Daniel did. And Daniel's, sometimes he's tough on an orchestra because his demands make you work hard. And some people in orchestras don't want to work that hard, so they don't like it. And as I say, I could tell stories that that probably would not be appropriate on the air, but Daniel and I were colleagues. He was my boss. We were colleagues. We played chamber music together, and we had lots of private talks alone. He was always accessible. Schulte had layers of people between the orchestra and him, because you had to go through all these people just to talk to him. Daniel Barenboim's door was always open.
Wow.
You know, you just knock and he said, "Come on in."
Wow.
You know, very, very different style.
I mean, we have about 5 minutes left. I would love to carry this conversation on. You have so much experience. Could you talk a little bit about the legacy of the Chicago Symphony and what it was like to be there in the Schulte era? You did the first European tour. You came back to a ticker tape parade. I mean, you guys played Let's Go Bears. You were like, you know, celebrities.
Yeah. In 1964, I was invited to go on a tour with the Pittsburgh Symphony 3-month tour, a State Department tour of 15 countries and 25 cities, and a repertoire of 50 pieces, all conducted by William Steinberg. I was the second horn. Forrest Stanley's wife decided she did not want to go. So I went and had a phenomenal time. But as a single person, for me, traveling was great. I have a wonderful quote by Mark Twain. Let me get it. No, I can remember it. Travel is fatal to bigotry, self-centeredness, the kinds of things that we're going. I have it right here. Let me see.
I can pull it up real quick, Dale.
I got it. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, narrow-mindedness. And as I heard it and was looking up other Mark Twain things, I got to go back and listen to all of Mark Twain's quotes. They're phenomenal. They're amazing. But I traveled 3 months with the Pittsburgh Symphony. What they found out was no orchestra will ever go on a 3-month tour again. No major orchestra, never again. So the first Chicago Symphony tour, instead of 3 months, was 6 weeks.
Wow.
And they even decided that 6 weeks was too long.
Yes.
But the conductors were Schulte and Giulini.
Wow.
When we got to Berlin, the intendant of the Berlin Philharmonic, Stresemann, he said to me, "How do you get Schulte and Giulini in the same tour to conduct together? This is amazing," because they knew what kind of conductors they were. But everywhere we went, they expect you to play like gods. Mm-hmm. So we tried to rise to everybody's expectations. We played as beautiful and as wonderful as we could. There were parties. I got on a later tour. I found out that there were 2 men in a recording company who were following the orchestra, and we were playing every other night Bruckner 4, Mahler 9, Bruckner 4, Mahler 9. And we got to a party in Vienna, and these 2 guys asked me to sit down at the table with them, and they were executives of Teldec Recording, and they asked me to do recordings with them.
Wow,
those were the Haydn recordings, and that led to the Mozart recordings. Yeah,
some of my favorites.
Yeah, you mentioned that I had done 1,000 recordings. That's a little bit too generous. Ohlberg used to keep track of how many and exactly what recordings pieces we did. And by the time I left the orchestra, it was over 700.
Dale, I have 2 minutes left. Could you just give a little bit of hope? Why is music and the arts so, why are music and the arts so important in this time of, Corona?
Music is like an opiate. It's, you don't need drugs if you can listen to music. And I mean all kinds of music. I am infatuated with jazz. We have a wonderful jazz department here. But some music goes a long way with me. I don't particularly like to listen to a lot of country music. But great music, opera, symphonies, jazz, if we play them, it's all by ear. Not improvised, but we use our ears. And it makes us happy to do it. It gives us joy, and it gives the world joy. And if anybody will just take the time, the thing that I could encourage students and professionals the most, listen to orchestras, listen to recordings. And I mean, really listen. Listen with a score. Listen. I did that from the time I was 14. I didn't realize that I was doing the right thing, but I did it. Wow. But listen, it will make you happier. It will give you joy. And if you can then perform publicly and do that, that will give you more joy. That's what we are unique in that. in the performing art, all the performing arts, all of the arts.
Wow.
The symphony orchestra is unique.